Dr. Merchant, I hate in general conspiracy theories, but there is this overwhelmingly annoying conspiracy when it comes to the Council of Nicaea. So many people, I even heard it in my church, that so many people believing and unbelieving do understand that at AD 325 at the Council of Nicaea, two things happened. That Emperor Constantine invented the canon of the New Testament, and that he invented the doctrine of the Trinity. For the last Sunday, I had apologist Eric Manning, with whom I spoke about the canon of the New Testament, the discrepancies, and all things of that sort. But for today, can we please just briefly attack this nonsense of Emperor Constantine inventing the doctrine of the Trinity?
Yeah. As we read the New Testament, and I'm thinking and hoping many of the people who are regulars of this podcast might have a pretty good general grasp of the New Testament. We have the Gospels, and then we have the various letters and epistles of the apostles, people like Paul and Peter and James, Jesus's old brother, and so forth, his own younger brother, and then of course Revelation at the end. During the writing of the New Testament, the Roman Empire turns on Christianity. At first, it's simply a nuisance in this backwater province of the massive Roman Empire, Judea. As you look at a map of Rome and the Roman Empire at the time, it was a small little province, pretty insignificant, actually. And it was at best a nuisance. Well, it had grown into something of a firestorm. In fact, Luke tells us in Acts that in Ephesus, they were saying of Paul and the others, these are the men who turn the world upside down with their preaching. There were riots in Ephesus. And now we might think, well, Luke is kind of telling us stories and it's overblown. We know from secular Roman history that it got so contentious that the Roman emperor at the time in 60 AD, would have been Claudius, had to kick all of the Jews out of Rome because the debate between Christians and Jews, and at the time there really was no difference. The vast majority of Christians were Jews and a minority were Gentiles. But it was a very Jewish, Hebraic early church, as they would have not seen that distinction that maybe we see today. Well, the Romans, they kicked all the Jews out of Rome because it had become so contentious. And then soon after, Nero came to power, very famous emperor, and he wanted to do some building projects in Rome. And there's some conspiracy theory, speaking of conspiracy theories, that there was a fire in Rome, and he set the fire so that he could very cheaply get certain lands for his personal building projects. I don't know what the truth of that might have been. Perhaps there was just a terrible fire and he took advantage of it. But to deflect any blame that would come to him, he blamed the Christians. And so from about 64 AD until the early 4th century, as you can imagine, the church is more or less running for her life, being the scapegoat of the Roman Empire. Anything bad happens, it's because of these Christians. It's because they don't worship the gods. They are such dogged atheists, they would have considered them, because they reject all of the Roman gods. And so because they reject the gods, they are unbelievers from the Roman pagan perspective. They do believe in this one God, and their God, how ridiculous is it? Their God, this Jesus who was crucified, now these are Romans speaking, he was some sophist philosopher that they worship. It's just nonsense. And they were accusing Christians of drinking blood because of communion and committing incest because greet one another with a holy kiss and all of this. And it's all done in secret. And the church was running for its life in all of that time. And during that time, you get certain centers of Christian ministry and preaching, but it's all under this massive persecution. In the early 4th century, around 320, Constantine came to power, and the Roman Empire is going through certain crises and difficulties all along. And Constantine wanted to unify Rome in a new way. The old paganism really was fading away. What they were saying of Paul and the others in Ephesus a few hundred years earlier, these men are turning the world upside down. It really did corrode and destroy the Roman paganism and the pagan culture that kept the Roman Empire together. And I think, being a little bit skeptical of Constantine's own claim to Christian conversion, I think he saw the writing on the wall and knew that in order to unify Rome, he would have to find some great unifying power. And he found it, ironically, in Christianity. The religion that had been blamed as being so un-Roman was now considered the most Roman thing. And so he claimed to have converted to Christianity. He won a battle, and Rome had so many civil wars and internal strifes, but at the Milvian Bridge to take full power of the Roman Empire, and he claimed to be a Christian and now legalized Christianity. And in the early 4th century, 325, he invited all of the bishops to Nicaea, just outside Constantinople, which becomes the new epicenter of the Roman Empire, the new capital of the Roman Empire. There it would now be modern-day Turkey, but such a powerful, important historical city. And just outside of Constantinople at Nicaea, all the bishops come together. Now, this is the first time in hundreds of years where all the bishops, literally from across the world, can come together and have a conversation. This had not been possible before. So you have bishops coming from Gaul, modern-day France, from Hispania, modern-day Spain, from Egypt, from Persia. Persia is outside of the Roman Empire, and they're coming into these Persian bishops are coming in from all around the world, and they're coming together. And what happens at the Council of Nicaea? They have a discussion about a number of things. One of the very important topics was a teaching that was coming out of the Church of Alexandria in Egypt. Alexandria was a very important epicenter of Christian teaching, and Arius had sort of become the figurehead of a movement which was teaching that Jesus is not fully divine. Because if Jesus is fully divine, then he's God the Father, and he can't be God the Father because look at what the New Testament tells us. Jesus comes preaching and teaching about the Father. He says, the Father sent me, the Father loves me. I only do and say what the Father commissions me to do and say, and that sort of thing. And so that's all nonsense. And so he can't be God because he's not the Father. And the vast majority of bishops, with the exception of 2 other bishops, so you've got hundreds of bishops there were 3, including Arius, that are saying Jesus is not God. All of the other bishops from around the world already come in agreement. So nothing was invented at Nicaea. There was a ecumenical discussion. What are we teaching in our churches? We haven't been in direct contact for a very, very long time. We've been in piecemeal contact, but here we are together. What do we teach in our churches? And they began to talk about what they teach, which scriptures they read, which creeds they affirm, and they all found that they were in overwhelming agreement. And so the Trinity, or the deity of Christ, was not invented at the Council of Nicaea. The church just came together to affirm it because they actually could. Now you might wonder, well, isn't it suspicious? Why did it take 300 or more years for them to come together and do this? Because they literally were not politically able to before that. They would have been killed if all the bishops had collected in one place. Well, perhaps not killed, but at least arrested. That would have been a great way for Rome to shut down Christianity, for all the bishops to come together in one place. So literally they couldn't meet. And you could just imagine this conspiracy theory, how ridiculous it is. Christians for hundreds of years have been preaching and teaching a certain thing about Jesus, reading certain gospels and epistles, and believing important things about Jesus. And many of them had family members that had been arrested, severely injured, and murdered over the Christian teaching. Can you imagine all the bishops coming together and then just deciding in one moment to just change Christianity and say, well, this isn't what we believed before, but we're all going to now come up with a totally new doctrine of who Jesus is. By the way, Jesus is God now. We didn't believe that before, but now we do. It just doesn't work that way. You can't go back to your church and say, by the way, the Christian message that your family was murdered for just recently, we're throwing that out. No, we now believe something new. No, that doesn't happen. They went back to their churches and nobody said a word about it because they didn't change anything. So it's just ridiculous. I mean, it is such a conspiracy theory. There's absolutely no historical record. In fact, as it goes, if anyone wants to blame Constantine really didn't contribute anything. He was really a figurehead to Constantine's credit, he was more or less quiet at the Council of Nicaea. He really had almost nothing to say, and he didn't really want to say anything. He didn't really seem to care whether they decided to be Trinitarians or Arians, which was very suspicious. He just wanted them to just come to an agreement, and he said, whatever it is, I'm going to use that, and I'm going to unify the empire with that religion. So I don't think that Constantine perhaps had a real conversion. He didn't seem to care. But the good news of Nicaea is that all the bishops came together and they compared notes after many decades, if not a few hundred years, and they said, we're all on the same page, with the exception of 3 guys.